So if we list, we can see the different versions that I've installed over time. And one of them is marked active. The active star, this is very low tech. All it really means is this is the one that's on your path. On this particular command prompt.
Not your machine path.
Right, yeah. If you want to make it more permanent, you can say kvm use a different number and persist. That will persist it for the current user. So if I log out and log back in, that one will be on the path still. It's just changing the path user environment variable. There's also a global. Global in this case just means the machine path. But you don't need to do either of those in order to get started or work.
I saw some situations where people will install a preview of Visual Studio, which I think is currently beta 1.
Yes.
Then they will go and get the command line for KVM, and they'll immediately do an upgrade.
Yes.
And then things start breaking in Visual Studio. Why is that?
Oh, well, Visual Studio is also not, in the same vein as the command line, it's not doing a global install of the KRE to run off of. It does have a copy that comes with its install, but it's kind of squirreled away. And what it's doing is it's expanding it into your user profile as you need it. If you do KVM upgrade, it's grabbing the latest, which could be the nightly build, and putting it on your machine. The other thing it'll do is change the alias default. Today, that's what Visual Studio is looking at.
An alias called default, and I see you have one right there.
Yep.
Okay.
And that's going to become something that's, the tooling is also evolving as we speak. So as more and more things become solid and as we learn more about how people use this and want to use it, we are refining how those kinds of selections are made to where, in the project properties, you'll be able to say which one you want if you don't want to go to the default.
Right.
So you'll be able to pin a particular project to a version of the KRE. And then it'll just use that one.
And it also begs the question, if you do run a KVM upgrade, bring down the latest version, did you mean for it to become the new default, or did you just want to get
certainly, yeah.
That by default, currently, like you said, it's all in flux, breaks Visual Studio, confuses Visual Studio, because you have to go and set a default back yourself.
Oh, well, that's the difference between install and upgrade. If you're talking about install, it's just downloading one and making it available. If you talk about upgrade, that's kind of an all-in-one step.
That's my fault for using it then.
Or it's the tool's fault for not documenting it. But what KVM upgrade is doing is it's finding the very latest one it can. It's downloading it, installing it, and changing default to point to it.
See, everything there was good except for the changing default to point to it.
Okay.
For me.
Yeah.
But I think the point here is, though, if you do choose to start playing at the command line, you do have the information available. I didn't know what I was doing, but I did notice default moved. I saw it change, and I can also control my active one. So it's not hidden from you.
Oh, yeah. And it's actually an interesting point. We can take a look at how some of these actually are implemented. As you can see in my profile, there's a .kre directory. So this is just my user profile. You can see all my folders. And in .kre packages, this is where they're unzipped.
Yep, just sitting there.
This is just some NuGet files, because that was the packaging format.
Right.
And here are where the rest of the commands live. So K and KPM are both batch files that are themselves, like KPM, runs this DLL. This is the program main for KPM. KPM itself is just a batch file. So it's all very low tech. And like you say, when you're using the command line to download these things and make one active, it's not doing anything complicated. It's just unzipping the files and changing the path to point at one of them.
And you could even go so far as to say it's not doing anything destructive.
Yes, you can delete that and they are gone. Even the question of aliases, people have asked, how is that information saved? And then they reply right away and say, oh, I looked and it's right here in these text files. That's as complicated as the alias.
A pretty white box.
Yeah. Yep. It's meant to be delete friendly.
And I even found that I could delete both those folders and it still wouldn't break stuff. Visual Studio still works. I can still run the KV. I can still go back and re-download it all again. Like if I got myself really screwed up, I could get back without too much trouble.
Yep. And that's one of the things. And that's one of the things that's interesting. When you start to pop the hood open on some of these, just like the old VW Beetles, the moving parts are so simple that you can sort of tinker with it. And it's simple enough that you can understand how it's working, and that lets you understand what you can do with it. Like if you need to sort of like Xcopy deploy to a server, you know how the things work. You know how they relate to each other. You know that this folder full of DLLs is 100% of what you need to run. And so, there's a lot of strength in that. That said, it's always partnered with tooling that hides it from you. So you're not exposed to that level first.
So an important reminder, in case it isn't completely obvious, this is the advanced part of the day. You don't need to know any of this stuff. You can just let Visual Studio handle it and choose to do it. It's the same kind of thing where over the years you've learned a lot about the .NET framework, and many of you never went into C, Windows, System32, yada, 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 and looked to see where the actual MS Core lib is. You lived and worked successfully as engineers, never caring how that worked. That's great. This is advanced plumbing 101 that we're doing right here. So don't feel sad if you don't get or care about any of this stuff.
Oh, yeah, yeah. Exactly in the same way that you can go your entire career and never edit a CS proj. And that, I mean, you're happy, and that's, the success of Visual Studio right there.
Maybe talk a little bit about scoping, because I understand it took me a while to figure out that KVM is always and everywhere. But K and KPM are specific to the version.
Sure. And that's easy to illustrate if we take a look in this directory. Here's KVM.
Oh, that's all it is?
Yeah, that's all it is. It's 2 text files. And we'll have an MSI for this as well, to get a couple of text files.
Why do we need an MSI for a couple of text files?
It's hard to install text files from the command line. Windows doesn't really have a curl, those kind of tricks that you'd find in other places. And a lot of people don't really feel comfortable going to a web page, copying a big command line, and pasting it into a command prompt, and feeling confident that it did what they wanted. So for those reasons, we'll have an MSI that set these up and put them on the path for you. But they themselves are just text files.
And they're always, and they're in your, if they're in your path. So when you set this up, it's in your path, that folder right there.
Yep. So this folder is put on your path just so that KVM is available.
Okay.
And then when you say KVM use default here, it's changed the path, so that the old runtime is no longer in the path. The one I just asked for is.
Okay.
KVM hasn't changed, though.
Okay.
But now, if I do KVM, it's running the KPM batch file out of this bin directory. And this is saying, here's the version number. This actually ran the managed code on top of this runtime. So the KPM is running on itself. It's part of the SDK, and it uses its own host process in there to run.
What if I'm watching this and I'm having mixed feelings about the most advanced, cool thing to come out of our team being based on batch files? And when I say batch files, I don't mean literally batch files, but it's like we're kind of back to scripting, but it's very clean and it's very simple and it's very kind of elegant. But at the same time, I think maybe we just thought it'd be more sophisticated.
Well, that's the thing. A lot of times sophistication is good if it's the only way that you can accomplish something. If there is an existing paradigm that is solid and has been in Windows and other platforms since computers existed, if that capability is there and you take advantage of it, you've accomplished your goal. So it's really if it ain't broken, choosing a runtime based on what is currently on your path is how all of these, languages, if you take a look at them, work at the end of the day. And so why be any different?
So when I type KVM on a Mac or a Linux machine, it'll be a shell script.
Yes. Yep.
And everything else will work the same, pathing and environment variables and all that kind of stuff.
Yep. Yep. That's exactly right. And the part that's managed code is the same managed code. The only thing that's different is the CLR that you'll be running it on top of.
Really? So when you said KPM is in our case, a batch file or a PowerShell file that points to package manager DLL, the same exact thing applies on a Linux or a Mac?
Yes. On a Linux, it would be kpm.sh or a bash file of some sort. And then, yeah, exactly that.
All right. Let's switch back to the slides real quick just to make a bookmark point there. Okay, so KPM scoped now to a particular version of the runtime that you selected.
Yep. So KPM is your single command for all of the SDK commands that you need to run.
Okay.
And so within an SDK, there are a number of things you need to do. Downloading dependencies, compiling a project, turning a project into a NuGet package, getting ready for deployment. All of those things are in the KPM umbrella. So everything that the SDK needs to do for you, the commands are located in there.
Sometimes people have looked at KPM and said, oh, this is like NPM. Is it like that and more?
Well, I think it's exactly like that, and .NET specific, though. So it has a number of commands so far. It is much like NPM, but it is based on the NuGet standards, of course, and it is based on using Roslyn to create assemblies and to create NuGet packages. Other than that, metaphorically, it's all very similar to that. If you're familiar with what NPM can do, you will probably find an analog. And if you're familiar with .NET, of course, you'll find an analog because build builds.
Now, we have KPM restore. That's like NPM install. But then we have KPM install. What is the difference between install and restore then?
Oh, yeah, yeah. Install might be something that'll change in a little bit. Install is a slightly different gesture. It's where you add a dependency to a project and then run restore. So it's a dual command. So install means add plus restore.
So that's interesting. So that's now the second time where I've gotten confused by dual commands. KVM upgrade did a bunch of stuff,
Yeah.
and KPM install is something is an add and a restore.
Yeah, yeah. And, for those reasons, and, is definitely open to feedback, and we're getting feedback constantly from the world. The commands like that will probably evolve and change.
If I were going to make with a notepad a project.json and write a startup.cs, that tells me, here are my dependencies and here's my startup. And we saw that in Daniel's talk where he made a hello world. Would I run then KPM restore to bring down the dependencies and then?
Well, you certainly can, and you can also do that directly from Visual Studio if you're using it. The IDE sort of contains all of that for you and is running restore in the background. But that is exactly what you would do. You would author a project JSON, run KPM restore, and then your binaries are available to run. So you can fire right up from there. Should we fire up a copy of Visual Studio and do something like that?
Sure, if you want to. Let's not. We don't want to duplicate too much of what we've already seen because I really like learning some of this context that you're giving me that I haven't seen before.
Oh, okay. Well, just let me know anytime you'd like to see some of it actually.
Yeah, sure. Talk to me about wrap. That seems like it bridges two worlds.
It does. KPM wrap is something that's being added just now, and it's something that will hopefully light up in some of the very near editions of Visual Studio. What it is when you have a project JSON, it can depend on other project JSONs. It can also depend on NuGet packages. So we're kind of unifying the unit of dependency. In CS Proj, there was always a kind of disconnect between I'm referencing an assembly versus another CS Proj.
Well, yeah.
And when you reference NuGet, it's kind of like referencing an assembly, but it's someplace else. So in this project type, those are all unified. When you depend on something by name, you depend on it by name. And if it is a NuGet project or another K project, it doesn't really matter. They're functionally equivalent. When you have a dependency, you have a dependency, and a project and a package are the same. The thing that's missing is existing code. If you have a CS project in your solution already, if you have any of that existing asset that you want to reuse, and everybody does want to reuse their existing works, you need abilities to reference CS Proj from a project JSON conveniently. And that's where this tool enters in. So it's a new command, KPM wrap on a CS Proj, will generate a project JSON in a kind of a standalone location. And then you can reference that as well. So from your project, you can start a ASP.NET 5 web application or class library or command line application, wrap existing CS Proj class libraries, and they suddenly become ASP.NET 5 visible projects. And it goes through them transitively. So if you wrap class library A, and it's using 3 NuGet packages and 2 DLLs and 1 other CS Proj that's also using 2 NuGet packages, all of that sort of becomes transparently accessible to your original application. So it'll follow the dependencies down, and it'll all work from your web application. So an ASP.NET 5 web application can reference that graph of CS Proj technology, and it'll all come together.
So thinking perhaps it's overly simplistically, a number of people are always asking the question about what does the upgrade scenario look like? Maybe you could put some of that into context, because they might say, oh, look, wrap is the magical way that I will bring my giant 70 projects from over there to over here. But that doesn't answer the desktop CLR versus core CLR issue. That just says these are now available as references in the context of an ASP.NET 5 project.
Yeah, it's all about options and how much you want to bite off in terms of porting. So KPM wrap is, one last thing. In Visual Studio, you can, when you right-click Add Reference and do a project-to-project reference, that's the Visual Studio gesture for that. You won't have to run KPM wrap yourself.
I see.
So if you go to ASP.5 project, right-click Add Reference to a .NET 4.5 class library,
that happens to be running in the same solution.
Yeah, it just looks like a reference appeared and works. That is the quickest way to get existing class libraries available in a K project. There are other ways. which are, well, mostly efforts of porting. You can put a project JSON in the same directory, and by convention, it will see all of the source, and it'll. You can switch to that as your project type instead of the class library, and so in that way, you can migrate your entire application bit by bit. The thing that a lot of time was spent on, actually, in the class library that Visual Studio is running for ASP.NET Next is combined IntelliSense. So if you choose to go that route, and you go into your project JSON and say, this thing runs on .NET 4.5, the full desktop framework, ASP.NET 5.0, ASP.NET Core 5.0, if you choose all three of those as places that you want that code to run, it will give you the combined IntelliSense to let you know anytime you've used an API that's not available on any of those three. So as you're programming...
You said three?
Sure, yes.
What is the third?
Oh, if you, in your project JSON, if you say ASP.NET 50,
right,
ASP.NET Core 50,
right,
and .NET 4.5.
Oh.
Yeah. If you do that in your project JSON, you've technically created a package with 3 DLLs. One of them is for .NET 4.5 framework applications, the full framework, like, the full framework, the one that we're using today. If you say KPM build on that, it will create a nupkeg with those 3 DLLs in there. And that's a way that you can continue to create software that runs on multiple frameworks and has one single project type and creates a nupkeg that can be then shared and imported by other solutions.
I see. So if I'm a person that makes a library that I'm going to give to other people within my enterprise, I could manually build out 3 DLLs, and I can say use that one for Windows Phone and that one for ASP.NET 5 and use that one for today. I could do portable class libraries and hopefully make one that works everywhere, but probably would not. Or in this new world, basically I have single source and perhaps some if-defs, perhaps not. We automatically fan out and make 3 DLLs, but they're automatically put into one package. So you think about one build artifact, and I hand that one thing to you, and no matter what context you use it in, it will work.
Yeah, that's
so it's not a portable class library, as it is a smart NuGet that feels portable.
When you say in Visual Studio, file new ASP.NET 5 class library, like we mentioned before, the class library is actually, the project is a package. The project and the NuGet package are the same. So what you're working on is a single project that's one NuGet package, multiple target frameworks.
Okay.
And the IntelliSense shows you that. In Visual Studio, there's that drop-down where you can choose. Yeah, you can choose which one you want to focus on, but it's giving you the warnings. You've used something that's only available in .NET 4.5. You better change that. And like you said, if-defs are available as a last resort. Nobody ever wants to if-def their code like crazy, but every once in a while you do hit a place where something works one place and not the other, and so you can choose to if-def. And then when you hit compile, there's one compile, one nupkeg comes out. It's just that the DLLs in the 2 different locations have different behavior as appropriate for them.
One thing I think I got a little bit confused about, though, is that you said I can say ASP.NET 50, as you say, ASP.NET 5, ASP.NET 5, Core 5. Then you said .NET 4.5. I thought ASP.NET 5 runs on .NET 4.5. What's the difference between ASP.NET 5 and .NET 4.5?
That's actually a good way to put it. ASP.NET 5.0 runs on the .NET 4.5 CLR, but it is itself a process container. It's the programming model. So ASP.NET 5.0 and ASP.NET Core 5.0 both have the same application model, both have the same programming model. If you have a program class with a main entry point, you can do dependency injection in the program class's constructor in order to get hosting services. That's because you're running in a host that understands dependency injection. So those are all qualities of the ASP.NET 5.0 runtime environment. If you are compiling for .NET 4.5, you're not assuming that you're in that runtime environment. So things like a program main where the program class has a constructor with dependency injection, you would not want to do that in the .NET 4.5 case.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So ASP.NET 5, well, it runs fine on .NET 4.5 and .NET 4.5. It's not then running in the context of this new environment that provides so much. It's running in the context of kind of like the classic ASP.NET EXE.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. If you were going to be making a Windows Forms application or a straight .NET 4.5 command line EXE, there you would be using the .NET 4.5 target framework name. If you were creating something that was going to be running with the dependency injection and the new tools and the new configuration, and was going to be switching between the two frameworks,
Right.
that's where you'd be using the ASP.NET 50 or ASP.NET Core 50.
Okay. But if I'm, JSON.NET author, or I'm writing an XML parser, or any kind of non-UI specific thing, any of the thousands of library NuGet packages, what should they do today to start getting ready? They should start to build their stuff in this project system.
It's certainly an option, and that's one of the things that we're hoping that the tools like wrap will make more, powerful and compelling options available for them, because they do have a lot of CS projects that are existing, and a lot of those are coming together in a single NuGet package. So one of the ways that you can arrange it is to have a project JSON for the ASP.NET 50 and ASP.NET Core 50 targets, and then KPM wrap the other CS projects that exist in your solution. So you can kind of have a hybrid where 3 of the DLLs are created by the existing CS projects, and the other ones are created when Project K sort of scoops everything together and makes a nutcake.
Okay, all right. Let's move on our slide deck there to custom commands. We've seen that you can make these custom commands in project.json, that pack generates batch file wrappers for each of those. But I'm not really clear on what the command is. It is just a main inside of a DLL?
Oh, sure. We can take a look at that. It is just a main inside of a DLL. If we go into we can take a look at this one. We see that it has 2 commands defined. And when you say K to run something,
right,
you can say what the command name is immediately afterwards. This command name is looked up in this section, and this is substituted for what the user had in the command line. So I could say K hello, or I could say K hello world.
So it's an alias.
It's an alias, basically, yeah.
I see.
It's an alias plus additional arguments if you want to put them in line.
Okay.
This hello world that we're looking at right there, or this Microsoft ASP.NET hosting, that's the assembly name that has the program main in it. All right?
Gotcha.
So when you say K web, it's telling you find program main in this DLL and pass it some more options. So when you say K web, what you're really doing is you're giving control to Microsoft ASP.NET hosting.dll program main, and it's the thing that's saying starting, and not telling you the port, but then continuing to start up a server that is going to be hosting your web application.
Okay. Why, and I'm just thinking about the audience, why would I want a console app? Like I see you brought in system.console, you can say K hello world. What is the difference between saying K hello world and just saying hello world.exe?
Well, for running on different CLRs, at the moment, Core CLR doesn't have the idea of creating a native executable image. So that's what that is really providing for you. The K is really providing for you.
Like when you say mono on Linux.
Exactly. You say mono, you say Java, you say Ruby, Python. All of those have a host process that is your language stack. And then the first argument is the program that's being run. So same thing in this case. If you say K space hello world, it's going to find hello world DLL and run it. If you're running cross-platform, your experience is going to be the same then. You don't have a Windows executable that you're X-copying to another operating system. You have a bunch of managed DLLs. You copy them to the other operating system, and they run well, exactly as they're intended to. The other operating system would have a different host process. Like you say, the other operating system might have whatever is native in that location that can run a CLR. And from that point forward, it's bootstrapping the runtime environment, and then bootstrapping your code, and then everything else runs normally.
And those things are usually symbolic links or aliases on other platforms. I mean, Java, Python, Ruby.
Yeah. Yep. It's all going to be the same thing. When you say Java, hello world.jar, whatever is the Java that is on the path for that command prompt is going to start up, load your program, and run.
Kind of does make you wonder about our name, though. You said the naming is in flux.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
K.
Yeah. These things are all, yeah, actually, I remember Nuke itself had kind of like a community input on the naming. It fluctuates and evolves until everything comes together in the end.
Indeed.
So, yeah, we expect lots of feedback.
So then on the next slide here, we talk about hosting. So in this context, then, you said that K is the the bootstrapper, the application host. I like the parallel that you drew with Python and Ruby and all those other kinds of things. That makes sense. The language host. But But up-leveling and think about a different kind of hosting your web application, while they're all going to be hosted in this example in that kind of that runtime, you can have, you said Microsoft at ASP.NET hosting, but you said server Kestrel. What is that? And are you saying I can host my web apps in different containers, different hosts?
Oh, absolutely. And one of the things that's also kind of interesting mentioning hosting is that there's not a lot of difference between a command line program and a web application and something hosted by IIS.
Really?
It's all the same project type, yeah. It's what happens when it starts that makes them different.
Because I think people who are like been in the industry a long time, they're like, well, that's totally different. It's entirely foreign, and you're saying that they're pretty much the same.
Well, they actually are pretty much the same. The one that's different would be IIS because it's giving you a different process, and you're running inside that process. Other than that, everything is pretty much the same. Well, again, like the Node example, the difference between a Node command line application and a Node web application really is whether or not it starts listening on a HTTP port. Other than that, they're identical. And the same is true in this case. You can have things like EF migrations that you run as commands from the command line in the same code base that is a web server. If you run it as kweb, it just runs the web server and loads the actual HTTP implementation, which is pluggable. And that same file system location can be set up to run on IIS and IIS Express if it is pointed at that same location. So one project, and this is an example of that, can be set up to run all three of those ways. And in Visual Studio, in the properties pages, you actually get to choose in the dropdown.
Right.
You get to choose between IIS Express, Web, and Hello. You're basically saying what happens when you press F5.
But in Visual Studio, IIS Express appears in Visual Studio, but not in the project.json, because that's a totally different way. Like, it's not K that bootstraps that relationship. It's Visual Studio and its internal knowledge of IIS Express.
Yeah, correct. If you wanted to get the same IIS Express command line experience, it's not hard. You just have to know what the IIS Express command line is. So you can go to the right directory, type IIS Express, run in this port, on this folder, and it finds that folder, locates the K runtime, initializes it, it runs the web application. So you can do IIS Express from the command line. Exactly like Visual Studio is doing, if you just know what the one or two switches are that you need.
Would that be something I'd want to put in here if I wanted to run IIS Express from the command line as a command within a project.json?
IIS Express might be the one that's different, only because it doesn't have a managed DLL entry point.
Oh, I see. So you need to have your own little managed utility to do that for you.
I would probably do it as a batch file. Yeah.
That's to your point from before. Hey, it's the most simple thing that could happen. Why?
Oh yeah.
Why make it more complicated?
Yeah, and then if somebody sees it in the folder, they can just double-click it, and IIS Express opens up in its own DOS box, and you see the output, and things start serving.
So we're going to talk about Kestrel in a minute, but what is Microsoft.ASP.NET.hosting?
Oh, Microsoft ASP.NET Hosting. That is the entry point that understands your startup class.
Okay.
I feel like we might want to open, just to take a look at the code.
Oh, well, let's do it.
Yeah. So if we open this up and get some of these out of the way, this is the folder that we were just looking at.
All right.
There is the program main that khello would run. Hosting is a different entry point. It has a program main, and what its job is to find your code and your startup class, create that startup class, and then give it control. So hosting will load this, and I'm sure you've seen this demoed a lot today.
And does it find it by its name, startup? Is that a convention?
Yeah. Startup is a convention. Configure is a convention. So just like program main is a convention.
Well, that's a good point, because my pedantic brain was like, well, that's not really an interface, and shouldn't there be an I this or that? But in this case, public static void main, just because it's always been that way.
Yeah, and like we mentioned, the systems are IOC enabled, so that kind of fights having a base interface just a little bit, because if you put additional interfaces from the runtime that you want injected into this argument call or into this function call, an interface doesn't really let that happen because it'll tell you haven't implemented that method correctly.
I see. So you're saying I can put whatever I want on configure, And not only will it find, configure, and start up by convention, but it'll also inject in those things for me.
Yep, you can get the hosting environment, logger factory, those other kind of things.
That puts logging really early in the process. That's pretty cool. Like,
oh yeah, yeah. We definitely have taken some of those building blocks and made them optionally available, not mandatory, but if you want to